I've never learned if those creatures have a name. It has always been just they. I first learned of them when I was very young and lived in a warmer place that now I can barely remember. From what I can recall, it was because of them that we had to move, though I didn't even see one until much later. My parents took me to live in the mountains. It'll be safer, they said, and for a long time, it was. We made our new home in the woods, high up a slope. Firewood was plentiful, and my father was a hunter, so we had fur pelts and never lacked for food or warmth. My mother was a painter, and I guess I took after her. And soon our home was full of paintings, depicting scenes of my father's hunting trips, of which he often bragged. The land itself has been around with things an artist's soul yearned to capture. For though frigid, it was a beautiful place. It still is. An evergreen forest has coated our mountain, and a ring of black and white peaks have formed a jagged horizon. Further, towards the great ice caps, a vast tundra's been stretching out in a sea of reddish and brown-hued grass. Wondrous green lights often grace the sky with their flowing dance. Father hunted and kept the storytelling tradition alive, while Mother forged and painted. We managed to settle into a rugged, sometimes lonely, yet ultimately satisfying existence. It didn't last. They came to haunt us once again. Questions are still gnawing at me, though. Did they come after us? Were they somehow drawn to us? Or was it just by chance? We learned of their arrival when my father didn't return from one of his outings. My mother went looking for him, and as she came back, she breathlessly told me that she spotted them, prowling amongst the trees. And I never saw my father again. We laid low for a while, holed up at home, terrified, hoping the creatures won't track us down, that they would simply go away. But then food began to run out, and we had to start taking risks. My parents had chosen this place for its remoteness. There was no one around to turn to, and so Mother took me with her to hunt and forage. She was too afraid to leave me alone. In any case, they never found our place. We fished in streams and even went down the mountainside to a greener valley for berries. It was during one of those excursions that I saw them for the first time. Just two of them, covered with shaggy fur and hunched. They were creeping low to the ground. I'm pretty sure they saw us too, but they kept their distance. We backed away and covered our tracks on the way home, fearfully looking over our shoulders. And not much later, from our high vantage point, we saw movement below. They came out in great numbers, scurrying among the trees like a swarm of insects in the underbrush. They didn't find us, at least not yet. And since then I couldn't get much sleep, waking up from frenzied nightmares of invading monsters and expected them to do so in the waking world. Mother rested even less, insisting on keeping vigil. In the end, it was just what doomed her, as one day the days of fatigue made us unwary. The creatures were waiting for us, hidden in the snow. They came as a horde, bellowing madly, and my mother screamed for me to run, and I did. A crushing feeling of despair, stronger even than fear, overcame me as I realized she wasn't closely following at all. Looking back, I could no longer see her, but I hesitated long enough for the monsters to start catching up with me. In mindless panic, I fled. With tears blinding me, I nearly lost my way and had to double back to a stream in order to cut off the trail of my footprints. My parents were gone, but their teachings weren't. They're gone. You see, the thought filled me with sorrow, and it sapped my will to go on. I barely had the strength to get a fire going in order to save my freezing feet. Collapsing and curling into a ball, I wept, soon trailing off into a shallow sleep. In the following days, I despondently went through the motions of everyday survival. Instinct alone kept me going, but fear poisoned every waking moment as well as my sleep. Worse yet was the incessant gnawing of guilt for what I then saw as cowardice. Maybe it was better to stay with my mother and meet my fate. It drove me to the point where, unable to face those creatures, I walked instead into the open tundra, intending to freeze to death. What made me turn back were the dancing lights over the glacier. Strangely, that night they took on a red hue instead of the usual green. This moment of unique beauty swayed me not to give up just yet. Be it by blind fate or supernatural intention, the dancing red light turned out to be an omen. As I was laying down to sleep by the fire that night, my dejected negligence in covering my tracks led to nightmares becoming reality. They've found me. Only 3 in number, but no less terrible. Up close, they were even more horrifying. Shorter, but more massive than me, while from beneath all the fur-gaped faces, hideous beyond words, with weirdly protruding noses and furious, insane eyes. They brandished fire and wicked, sharp things. Bellowing, they descended upon me, kicking, thrashing, stabbing. In panic and desperation, I lashed out, flailing, screaming, grabbing, scratching, and biting. And as my teeth caught the exposed flesh of a monster's hand, piercing skin and crushing bone with barely any effort, I tasted its hot blood. And it tasted good. A shriek of torment accompanied a sanguine gush from a severed hand, making the monsters recoil in what seemed to be genuine terror. Having no time to feel puzzled, I acted on pure instinct and pounced another creature, ramming my claws into its eye sockets. With a short yelp, it went limp, and the last one ran for its life, and again, my instinct took over, where addled mind gave way as I followed the creature outside. It panted, stumbling, tripping, and running into things after it dropped its fire. Dumbfounded, I realized that, unlike me, the thing cannot see in the dark. It was all too easy to tear its throat open. And as I slowly went back, the handless one was in its death throes, having bled out. In the light of the fire, I gazed at my own bloodied hands. The black blood from my wounds was barely there, while glistening red of theirs contrasted distinctly with my snow-white skin. In a fit of bizarre inspiration, I approached one of the paintings that was adorning the walls of my home cave, a depiction of this very mountain, flowing smudges of green that represented the lights on the sky. I painted over with the red of blood. In the fire's flickering light, the painting seemed to dance almost like the real thing. I knew well enough that blood will turn brown over time, but for now, it was beauty to my eyes. With curiosity now in place of terror, I crouched over the dead monster. Its fur turned out to be no more than a coat of animal pelts, obscuring its real bulk. And as I unwrapped it, I saw a feeble thing of blubbery flesh, soft muscle, and pinkish skin. I dreaded a frail, half-blind creature, and upon learning this, my fear was gone. So, remember this tale, children, as we go into the night, when alone and in the dark, they our prey and not the hunter. Let them huddle and cower behind their wooden walls and tools of iron. The fear is now theirs, and should they stray into our woods again, we will make feast of their flesh and paint of their blood.